Hello, I'm Ruth Nicholson, and for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about committees and meetings and how to make them better. I tell everybody at the front end of any workshop I do what you can expect to get out of our time together. And so for this workshop, we're going to talk about figuring out when you actually need a committee. We're going to talk about setting up and how to support a committee so that it actually can work well together. And then we're going to just talk about the secret to having shorter meetings with better results. For this time, I'm going to use the committee as sort of an all-encompassing term to mean boards of directors, work groups, task forces, anytime you're convening a group of people together to get something done. So I'm just going to call that committee for the sake of simplicity today. So who am I? I'm an international facilitator and a federal mediator. And in addition to my work in things like nuclear waste cleanup and closing military bases and strategic planning, I've actually done a fair amount of work in soccer, youth sports, and nonprofits. And my work, especially in youth sports, is all around trying to find ways to address what I call the 7 deadly challenges of a youth sports club. And they range from directors of coaching that have too much to do, to coaches who need additional communication skills, team managers who are overwhelmed, volunteer programs that need to work better, the need for multiple sources of revenue, and conflict resolution. But the second deadly challenge has to do with meetings, because it takes forever to make a decision or get something done in our committees. So let's talk about the 3 things we're going to do today. We're going to talk about when do you need a committee in the first place, how to set your committee up so it operates well, and the why behind a meeting, or the antidote to deadly challenge number 2. Now, the first rule of a good meeting is don't have one if you don't need one. One of my most favorite facilitator colleagues used to say there are 3 types of meetings. There are meetings to share information. There are meetings when you need to get a group of people together to co-create something, to do something together. And there's the meeting that never should have happened. I tell you, I make my living running meetings, but remember the first rule of a good meeting, don't have one if you don't need one. So how do you tell if you need a committee in the first place? Well, there are really sort of 4 things that will trigger the need to get a bunch of people together to do something. One is a legal requirement. Things like in your bylaws, it says you'll have a board of directors. It's a thing with nonprofits, right? Sometimes you have a project where you need a variety of skills, a variety of different people to work together to make that happen. Imagine doing a fundraiser where you need people who can get a place to have it, and people who can get donations for prizes, and people who can send out invitations and get people to come. Then you have projects that are just large. You need a lot of people to pull off that project. Think of a big soccer tournament and how many people it takes to physically do that event. Or maybe you have a project that needs support of your club. You need people to be on board with this. Imagine your uniform committee, right? You want your kids, you want your athletes, you want your parents, you want your club to be proud of the uniform that represents your club. And it's important to get that buy-in and that support. So 4 reasons to have a committee: legal, skills, labor, PR. But you want to make your committees relevant. Don't have a committee just because it's Tuesday. The way to make your meetings meaningful is that those work groups have important work to do that is tied to what your organization is trying to accomplish. So before you start talking about meetings, take a step back and do some foundational work. Make sure your roles and responsibilities are clear for everybody, not just your coaches, not just your board of directors. Include your admin people, your key volunteers. And I'm not talking about the board as a whole. I'm talking about the president does this, the secretary does that, the treasurer does this. And make sure you can tie those responsibilities directly to your players, your teams, and your programs. Because if you can't tie what you are doing directly to a player or a team, then you need to ask yourself, why am I spending time and money doing this thing? Because in the world of youth sports, it is about our athletes and our teams. And then from that, your committees are in line with, this is why we're here, and this is why we're trying to, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Years ago, I worked with a board, and every year I did what we called the green sheet, because it was on a green sheet of paper. It was one page, and it was all focused on their board of directors. And it was a table. And the top of the table was all of the positions on the board. The second line of the table was their areas of responsibility: the tournament, fundraising, running meetings, getting uniforms, paying the bills, keeping the files. The third line was what committees and work groups did that specific board member work with to implement their scope of work? Was it the uniform committee, the nominating committee, the tournament committee, whatever that was? And the final line was the links of those committees to supporting teams and programs. We have this committee because it helps teams get uniforms. And on one page, you could map the position on the board, what it was that position did, and how it directly linked to players and teams, and what work groups were in the mix. It sounds a little bureaucratic, but it will tie it together so that when you get to your meetings, you've got a good context. Some of you might know Sam Snow. We once were talking, and he literally said this to me: still breathing should no longer be the criteria to administer soccer in our nation. I said, Sam, I need to use that quote, right? Set yourself up for success by doing the foundational work and helping your committees be successful. And let's talk about how to do it. Because you know what? It's not that hard. You basically need to do two things. Establish clear expectations for how your committees and work groups are going to operate. This includes your board of directors. And plan and facilitate effective meetings. Note, I said plan and facilitate, not just jump in cold. So let's talk about expectations for committee operations. This is still kind of a foundational piece. And trust me, if you do the foundational work, your meetings are going to be better. When I do ground rules, expectations for groups, I've probably been working with nonprofits for over 30 years, lots of boards and committees. But ground rules and expectations are more than we promise not to interrupt each other, and we promise to put our cell phones on vibrate, and we promise to play nice, right? That is the first level. For individual members of the committees, what are the expectations for doing your homework, for attending meetings, for behavior in meetings, that sort of personal responsibility stuff. But there are two other parts. There's the how is the committee going to operate and work together? Who's going to run the meeting? Who's going to create the agenda? Who's going to take the notes? Are we going to vote? Are we going to use Robert's rules? Are we going to operate by consensus? How are we going to do that? How are we going to play in this game called meeting of our committee? And the third piece is not important on a daily basis, but when you're doing tough stuff, making hard decisions, making controversial decisions, you need to know how your committee is going to interact with people who aren't on the committee. And that might be communicating with your membership. It might mean communicating with your league. It might mean answering questions from the media or the press. But when you establish expectations at all three levels, the personal individual member of the committee level, how the committee as a group is going to operate, and how do you communicate and interact with people outside the group. You've now set your expectations up. The committee knows the rules of the game. And when you know the rules of the game, you can then tackle deadly challenge number 2. Because you have clear expectations, and now you can start having good meetings because the foundation is solid. Now, normally when I do this, I actually ask people to draw this on the back of a big old white napkin. It's a little harder to do in the virtual world, but I challenge you to draw out what makes a good meeting, because this is a picture of a good meeting. And let's break it down. It's all in the word why, W-H-Y. And the W stands for what? The W is all about purpose, and this is the most important thing to know going into any meeting. Let me say again, this is the most important thing to know going into any meeting. What do you want to accomplish? What do you need to accomplish? Because without this clarity, your meeting will be mush. So the 3 levels of purpose, there's the purpose of the big picture, the project, the program, the organization. We're working on our girls' high school program today, right? There's a purpose to the program. Every meeting you have has a purpose. If you cannot fill in this sentence, you need to think about why you're having the meeting. The sentence is, the purpose of this meeting is. You should be able to fill in that sentence. If you can't, then it's just another first Tuesday of the month. That's not a good enough reason to have a meeting. The purpose of this meeting is, you need to be able to articulate that. The purpose of this meeting is to adopt a budget, hire a coach, select a venue for the tournament. The purpose of this meeting is. And every item on an agenda is there for a reason. Every item on an agenda is there for a reason. I detest agendas that say old business and new business. Old business and new business are status. They are not purpose. Purpose is, this is what we need to accomplish. This is on the agenda because it's important, and we've got to do something with it. And guess what? I'm going to tell you the secret, the number 1 secret of facilitation, which is we only do 3 things in meetings. The how of meetings, we only do 3 types of things in meetings. We gather or share information, think status updates, committee reports, coaching reports. We discuss, we analyze, we make sense of information. We got a membership survey. We have feedback on how our members see our programs. What does it mean? What's it tell us about what we should do next? And the third thing we do is we make decisions. We really only do 3 things in meetings. And guess what? When you match your purpose to your how, to your activity, that is the secret sauce that will make your meeting more focused, and you'll get better results. Because if you're making a decision, you don't want to get stuck in analysis paralysis, right? The other thing this does is, if you're not running the meeting, you're just a participant. You're a regular person, right? Now, you're a guerrilla facilitator. Because if the meeting starts going off track and wandering around and you're getting off topic, you as a participant can say, now, wait a minute. I thought the purpose of this agenda item was to select a venue for our next tournament. Is that right? And people go, yeah, that's what we're doing. And then you can say, well, how come we're talking about how to divide up the brackets for the girls' divisions. It's not that the brackets for the girls' divisions are not important, but right now we're trying to pick a bunch of fields to have a tournament. It gives the participants in the room the ability to help the meeting stay on track and to stay focused. Give them that tool, and now you have help staying focused. So I said the magic word was why, W-H-Y. What's the why? The why is all about people. Is it you or is it somebody else? Because not everybody involved or connected to a meeting is actually going to be in the meeting. You have people who have input to the meeting. You have information they're giving you. Do you have a bookkeeper that gives you a report on your bank account before you go into a board meeting? Bookkeeper might not necessarily be in the room, but that information is. Who are the people that provide information? Reports, summaries, data. You do have the people in the room. And you have the people who are affected by whatever happens in that meeting. Did your fees change for the year? Did you make a hiring decision for a new coach? Did you decide you're going to allocate a certain amount of money every year so your coaches can have a special education course? They may not all be in the meeting, but they may be affected by what you did in the meeting. So there are certain elements I use in all of my agendas. And my agendas often look different, but this is the core of what I do for agendas. One, I number all my topics just so they're easy to reference. We're on line 5. The topic doesn't tell you the purpose of the topic. So if I just say budget, we could be creating a budget, we could be adopting a budget, we could be just checking on the status of a budget. The word budget doesn't tell me enough. But if the purpose is, for this meeting, I want a status update, it's a presentation, it's sharing of information, right? The treasurer is going to do it. And there's a resource document. I've got a monthly spending report that I can share with folks. Often things that fall under the data sharing category of activities, oftentimes there are other ways to do that other than in a meeting. My second agenda item are tryouts. Oh my gosh, can you imagine how many agenda items we could have for tryouts? Like scheduling, marketing, staffing. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into tryouts, right? It's a lot of work. But the purpose of this agenda item is to set the dates for the tryouts. It's a decision. It's an action item. The tryout committee chair is going to lead this discussion, and we have the annual club calendar so we can figure out what dates make sense for tryouts. So at a minimum on an agenda, you want topic and purpose. Don't just put down budget. Don't just put down tryouts. What is it that you want to accomplish? And if you're having trouble framing a purpose, frame it as a question, because people can get that. So if you say for tryouts, what dates should tryouts, when should tryouts occur, right? Put that on the agenda and people go, oh, we're answering that question on that agenda item. Sometimes framing agendas as questions also helps people stay focused. So the picture of a good meeting lives in the word why. Clear purpose for the meeting, clear purpose for your agenda items, knowing what you're doing. Are you sharing information? Are you talking through information? Are you making a decision? You match those two things up, it will transform your meetings and your people, making sure the right people are connected. So let's check in. Remember, I told you what I want you to get out of this workshop. I want you to know, when do you need to convene a committee or a work group? There's a legal reason, maybe. Maybe you need a lot of different skills to come together. Maybe you just need a whole lot of numbers of people to come together. Or maybe it's something that's so important, you need community support, you need member support to really make that thing work well. You set up a committee, you support a committee so that the foundation of it helps it be successful. You set clear expectations and ground rules for individual members, for the group as a whole, and for how that committee is going to work and communicate with people who are not in the group, who are outside the group, but may be interested or affected by what that committee does. And why? Getting shorter meetings that get better results comes from clear purpose with the right kind of activity and the right people in the room. So a couple of years ago, my grandson started playing soccer. He was 5. And his first game, he scored 3 times. 2 for his team, 1 for the other team. He was so excited. And we're walking off the field and he says, Grandma, you want to know how I did it? You want to know how I did it? I said, okay, you tell me. He says, this is how I do it. First, I think about what I want to do, and then I kick the ball, and I kick the ball, and I kick the ball, and I kick the ball until it goes in the goal. And you know what? When I use my head first, I know I can do it. Guess what? When it comes to your meetings, think about what you want to accomplish. Think about what you want to do. Use your head first, and you know you can do it. Thank you for spending some time with me. I hope this helps.
That was great. Thank you, Ruth. We're now going to jump into questions and answers. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those questions now.
Ruth, we'll start off with a big one. What would be the biggest mistake to make when going into a meeting?
Not having an agenda. Because if you don't have a roadmap of what you want to do, and if the people in the room don't know why they're there, you're starting without a game plan. Years ago, my mother wanted desperately to be on the governing committee of the church. My dad was a pastor. She was the pastor's wife. Pastors' wives don't get to serve on governing committees. It's a conflict of interest. But when my dad retired, she was eligible because he wasn't the boss anymore. And they called and they said, you want to be on the committee? She's like, yes. They said, we're having a meeting next week. And she said, great. What's the purpose of the meeting? And they said, well, it's the first Tuesday of the month. And she said, oh, well, just send me the agenda and I'll figure out the purpose of the meeting. They said, well, we don't have an agenda. It's just the first Tuesday of the month. My mother had spent her whole adult life wanting to serve on the committee that ran the church. And she says, well, if you don't have a purpose and you don't have an agenda, I'm not coming to the meeting. And we were floored. The things she wanted most, she said no to because there wasn't an agenda.
That's great. Next question is, would you mind reviewing the content of your one-pager green sheet again?
Oh, okay. I should have put it in the presentation. So imagine across the top, you list all of the positions on your board. So president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and then if you've got like specific, the tournament chair or the boys team rep or all of the positions on your board, however many that is. The second line is how you divide up the responsibilities for the board. So typically the treasurer is handling, bank accounts and paying the bills and the financial component of the club. get specific about, well, what does the vice president do other than back up the president? Does that person do fundraising? Does that person do ombudsman and conflict resolution? Get really specific about what you want those folks to really concentrate on. So you're not saying everybody's in charge of everything, because if you're dealing with volunteers, that's just confusing. So the second line is, what specific things does each of those positions shepherd? The third line are the committees and work groups that board member is going to work with. Is it your nominating committee? Is it your finance committee? Is it the committee, the group of team managers that meets a couple times a year? Is it the uniform committee? What specifically are the work groups that those board members are going to work with? And then the last one, the bottom, is the link to your teams and your players and your programs. So if your uniform committee is made up of representatives of each of the teams, that's the link there. And it makes it very conscious between, yeah, I'm on the board, but do I just show up on Tuesdays? Or do I actually work with the field schedulers and the parks department, and I support that administrative staff so that part of the organization runs well? Not that I micromanage them, but I'm their go-to if there's a problem with renting fields.
Next question. What are your thoughts on having an executive committee comprised of the board's officers conducting the majority of the organization's business, as opposed to having the full board involved in day-to-day decisions?
I'm not a fan of boards being in, well, back up. It kind of depends on what you mean by day-to-day decisions. If you're talking about day-to-day operational decisions, I don't think boards should be involved in day-to-day operational decisions. If you're talking about board policy decisions, I think you want as much of the board involved in setting those policy decisions as possible. So you don't want to divide your board and say, this is the in crowd and this is everybody else. That has the potential to create conflict down the road. Executive committees are particularly valuable at doing things like setting agendas, making a policy interpretation when there's a time crunch, or addressing an emerging issue that needs to be addressed quickly, and you have to be nimble about it. But if you're using a 3-person executive committee to get out of the fact that it's going to be kind of a slog of a discussion, and just to avoid the inconvenience of engaging the full board, that's not a good reason to do it. So when your organization reaches a point where your board also doesn't have to administer the organization and do the day-to-day stuff, that's when you're going to start hitting the sweet spot and minimize the kind of micromanagement that's really common with volunteer boards.
Next question. What suggestion do you have to deal with members who pontificate, big word, during a meeting, even if it is about an agenda item and you're trying to move the meeting along to address additional agenda items? Do you suggest limiting discussion time as part of the rules/expectations of the meeting, or do you have another suggestion?
You can, if you know that lots of people are going to have an opinion. You can literally say, okay, we've got 15 minutes. I want to go around the table and hear from everybody. Everybody's got like 2 minutes to tell me what you want. So that you're setting the expectation that you want to hear from everybody. And you're not saying, well, we don't want to hear from Tammy. We want to hear from everybody. The other thing you can do is if you acknowledge, what I'm hearing from you is you're really concerned about how much this is going to cost. And repeat back to them so that people hear that you're hearing their point. And then you can say, and we want, to hear from others. So acknowledge not only that they've spoken, but that you have heard whatever their point is. If you can't follow their point because it's a whole lot of words, ask them to give you the headline. Like, I really want to understand your concern, Jamie. Can you give it to me like it's the headline of a newspaper so I really understand it? So you're playing the I want to understand you card, even though part of your agenda is I want to understand you and move on. And sometimes when I facilitate, I'll actually say that. If I've made a couple runs at it and I just can't get them to wind it down, I'll say, I got 3 other people I want to hear from. I want to make sure I understand you. Is this what you said? Yes, 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 yes. Great. Now I want to let some other people talk. And if we have some more time, we'll come back to you.
Before our next question, I do want to introduce Tammy Endow and Jacob Ames. They're a part of our member services team. They are our internal resource for governance here to help you with any questions you may have within your organization.
Thanks, Jamie. And I just wanted to point out for everybody that's on the call, we do have a section of our website under administration. It's the member toolkit, and you can find a whole host of information in regards to meetings and governance, insurance waivers and such, as well as 2 videos that Ruth has put together for us. One that's a little longer version of the webinar we just watched. The other would be our governance review process, otherwise known as GRIP. And so if you have some time, you might want to take a few minutes to sit down and watch those videos, and feel free to reach out to myself or Jacob with any questions you might have, or if you're interested in going through the GRIP process. Good. Thanks.
Another question, thanks has been given to Ruth on behalf of their town-based league. We'd like to thank you for the best practices you have shared. And then for Tammy and Jacob, there's thanks given to you for your support to help their league realign their governance document structure, roles, and responsibilities. And the question is, in your experience, how long is the process to transform situations like theirs? Like situations like theirs.
So Ruth, this is a league that we are restructuring their governance documents. There was a lot of restructuring to be done. So I think what is being asked is how long does that process normally take on average, if there is a average?
In some ways, it's easier to start from scratch than it is to come in the middle and tweak it. Simply because you don't have old habits and longtime folks who have remembered how it's been done since the Pilgrims landed. With a governing, with a nonprofit, you can be looking anywhere from 3 to 9 months. You simply because to get people together to meet and then filing paperwork and getting processes to work. Typically you can do it within a year so that you end up adopting the stuff at your next annual meeting. But you're typically not going to pull it off in like 3 months. Typically, you're going to be looking probably 6 to 9 months. And that's, if you can get around holidays and summer vacations and COVID.
And then one more question, we kind of touched on this a little bit on staying on course for meetings, but would it be a good idea to designate the last number of, say, 10 minutes, meeting minutes for non-agenda topics that come up?
I do have a number of committees that have, they call it open forum, but that's what it is. It's what else do we need to cover? I often suggest, even if you budget in that time, ask the question at the front end of the meeting. Don't wait till the end. So if at the front end you say, okay, here's the agenda, we're going to do these 3 things. Is there anything else we need to cover? So you know that up front, because sometimes those things are subsets of what's already on the agenda and it's just not obvious. Or sometimes you'll go, whoa, that's really important. And you might juggle the timing a little bit, or you might even juggle the order. If somebody comes in and it's really important, you might just decide to do that first, not last. But do that, with the group. What else do we need to cover and how do we fit it in?
That's great. That's all we have for questions. If any other questions need to be asked, please ask them now.
Ruth, while we're waiting for a couple more questions potentially come in, the majority of board meetings, membership meetings in Massachusetts are going to be open to the public, or at least open to members based on the Constitution. So how would you deal with gate crashers, people who want to come in and change the course of the agenda? And what strategies do you have or can share with us that can help avoid this?
So, I mean, back to the prior question, asking at the front end, are there other issues? Your gate crasher says, this is what's top of mind to me and the 15 parents I brought with me. If that needs to be on the agenda, then you've got the power to say, we're going to talk about this issue for 15 minutes at this time. So you've, for lack of a better term, you've boxed that in. You've said yes, and it's limited. Or you say, wow, that's an important issue, but it's not a board issue for today. Maybe there's a private conversation, mediation thing that has to happen first. So it's not ripe for board discussion. I work a lot with organizations that you come up with an escalation protocol. Like there's a problem at the team level, who do you go to? You go to the team manager or the coach. If that doesn't work, you go to the technical director or the director of coaching or the operations manager, depending on the issue. And so there's actually a process in the club of, this is how we solve problems and conflict. If you have that foundation, you're then able to look at that group of people and say, this issue is, currently under discussion with the finance committee. It's not ready for this meeting. But you've been able to tell the group, we're working on it. This is where it is in the process. We're not blowing it off, right? The message you do not want to send is, we don't want to hear from you and we're going to blow you off. That's not the message. But putting their concern in the context of, is it ripe for a board discussion? And if so, let's spend 10 minutes on it. If it's not, immediately being able to say, and this is how we're dealing with your concern in this very concrete way. We're going to assign it to Jacob because he's our new club mediator, ombudsman person, and he's going to work with you to figure out what the next step is. Hopefully Jacob was warned before we did that to him.
We have another question coming in. Any tips on keeping board members engaged during virtual meetings?
Oh, geez. The first piece is designing a virtual meeting not like an in-person meeting. And I live in the neighborhood that's ground zero for COVID in the US. So we're really uptight about it here. So I've been doing everything virtually since February 2020. Virtual meetings run slower than in-person meetings. It's a fact of nature. So, because we have to speak one at a time. Like if we all start speaking at the same time, we will lose everything we say. If we were in the same room and we kind of talked over each other, we wouldn't lose it all. It would be messy, but we wouldn't lose it all. So the pace of online meetings goes slower. You have to have more time to get your stuff done. Avoid 5-minute agenda items. They don't exist in the virtual world. If you have one, you just got lucky. The other is the length of time we can sit and pay attention and look at ourselves. Holy cow, I hate looking at myself. It's hard. It is mentally hard. So you want to plug in a break on a virtual meeting every 60 to 90 minutes. You really don't want to go more than a soccer game without taking a break. Don't go 2 hours. People, I mean, they will be rummy by the end of your meeting. The other thing is all-day meetings are really hard because even if you time in breaks every 90 minutes, preferably every 60, it's just exhausting. So don't take an all-day meeting agenda and say, we're just going to do it all day online. It just doesn't translate well. Shorter blocks, longer breaks, more breaks, or just break it up and say, we're going to do the finance stuff on Monday night and we're going to do the tournament stuff on Thursday. And if you don't have to be married to, I have to do it all at once, space it out, pace it out, because people are visually tired and we are not used to looking at each other. We're not used to looking at ourselves. I mean, come on, in the morning, it's, 3 minutes in the mirror, comb your hair, brush your teeth, done. We used to not look at ourselves. Now we do it all the time. And gosh, my nose is big.
Thank you for that, Ruth. I think that's it for the questions that we have. I do want to thank you for your time today and thank everyone else for joining. Our next and last session of the day will be with Stack Sports, and they will discuss US Soccer Connect and Sports Connect for clubs.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ruth. Bye.
Thank you, Ruth.